Hello, I had a comment recently on one of my videos about learning to code, and although this channel is not really about the technical side of game development, I wanted to talk about that just to maybe help some of you out who are just at the start of that process. So this is going to be a little bit of a pep talk and a little bit of a reality check about learning to code, why it's hard and why people struggle with it, and some of my own personal advice. Now, you have to take all advice that you get on this subject matter with a pinch of salt, because there are lots of people out there who just love the technical side of making games, and they're not necessarily interested in whether their advice helps you to finish making games. And often people give advice because they just want you to do things the way that they've done them. It's like a self-validation thing for them to give out that advice. I've taught intro to game development classes to hundreds of students now, and I've seen what people struggle with, and I'm going to talk about that mainly. So this is mainly aimed at anyone who has never tried to program a game, or who has sat down for a little bit and tried and struggled with it and then stopped. I think that's the first port of call, really, is have you really tried? The way I would define trying to program would be you have set aside like the equivalent of a whole working day. You know, you've had a free day at the weekend or whatever, and you've sat down for like 4 to 8 hours and really tried for that amount of time. And if you haven't, then I wouldn't really say you've tried. But yeah, Hookening said on my recent video, you can just make other things, where I was talking about how, you know, if you want to tell a story, you don't need to make a game, you can make something else. Hookening said, Ren'Py is simple, but learning some very minimum coding techniques and just being an overall copy and paste worked well enough for me. What I wanted to do is go into Godot and learn how to do all of this. I just cannot wrap my head around it well enough, but I am trying. Yeah, so trying to go from a framework like Ren'Py, which is designed to do a very specific thing, into something like Godot, which is much more open. And I think the place where a lot of people fall down on this is that they come to it with the perception that programming is complicated. And the first rule of computing really is that the computer only really does what you tell it to do. And if there's a bug, if something is behaving strangely, it's because that's what you told the computer to do. So this issue of complicatedness and perceived complicatedness, what I want to try and get across in this video is that you need to turn that around in your head and understand that the programming language isn't complicated, the software isn't complicated. Actually, what you are asking the computer to do is complicated, and the issue that you're facing isn't that you don't understand the language. That is something that you need to learn to understand, but it's that often you don't really understand what you're asking the computer to do. And if you come at it with a better understanding of what you're asking the computer to do, you will usually be in a better place to be able to self-teach this stuff, to be able to look things up in the manual and stuff like that, because ultimately, you know, you can follow as many tutorials as you like, you can copy people's code as much as you like, but until you get to the stage where you know what you're trying to achieve, and then you're looking up in the manual how to do different bits of that, you're not going to be able to problem solve for yourself. And that is the heart of what programming is. It's problem solving and learning how to, you know, transform a desired behavior into the instructions that the computer needs in order to carry that out. So Hookening, who wrote that comment before, talked about trying to transition from Ren'Py, which is a Python-based language for making visual novels, into using Godot, and finding this like a big jump. And I want to take a visual novel as an example now and just talk you through this idea of what you're asking the computer to do is actually quite complicated. And when you stop expecting it to be a simple 5-step process and realize that it's actually a 30-step process, then things might get easier for you, right? So I'm just going to make some notes in a document here so you can understand what I'm getting at. If we were going to write this out in just plain English without programming it, I want to show a sprite of a character, right? I want to draw a text box. I want to put text into the text box. I want the text to animate character by character. I want to play a sound when the text appears. That's all the kind of basic stuff that we need for a single frame visual novel where a character just says one thing. Okay, so each of these things that we want to do How can we break it down into like subtasks? Well, I need the sprite to be in the engine. This isn't programming. Whatever you're doing this in, whether you're doing it in Godot or Unity or GameMaker, this will be specific to the engine. I need to know the location of the sprite on the screen, the desired location, because this is something where you need to make a decision about it. And then I also need to know the scale. In just this action of putting a sprite on the screen, we need to know how to put a sprite in the engine. And we also need to know how to put the sprite in a particular place on the screen and how to scale it. And that means that we need to understand the bits of whatever language we're using that relate to these concepts before we can even just do this thing, right? Now, wanting to draw a text box, I need to know the X and Y locations on screen of the corners of the text box, right? And you might not even know that. When you first come to this, you might say, well, I don't know how to draw a rectangle on a screen, and you might have to look it up. But in most places, it's going to be, you know, coordinates for the top left and bottom right of the box, and then that draws the box. Putting text in the box, you need to know how to draw a text box and put text in it. You need to know how to feed the actual words into it, so how to create a string that houses those words to make it kind of remember what to say. I'm just trying to list everything that the computer program will need you to have told it to do in order for this to work. You might find some framework that does some of this stuff for you, but that's not really the point of this exercise. The point of this exercise is to show you how relatively complex just one scene of dialogue is in a visual novel and why it might be difficult to go from RenPy to another engine. I want the text to animated character by character. Okay, I need to know how to control the timing, right? So how do we make it so that there's 0.1 of a second or 0.5 of a second between the things? I need to know the full string and the string so far and differentiate them somehow, right? Again, I'm not proposing a particular programming method for this, but you've got the full thing the character is going to say, and then you need a record of like which letter are we up to in that string, and then you're going to be increasing that letter so that it goes da 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 da, right? And then yeah, you're going to need sound effects and stuff like that. Now, if I were doing this in a dedicated visual novel engine like RenPy, there's stuff on here that I wouldn't need to think about. I don't have to do this in RenPy. So I'm going to go back through and grey out the stuff that if you were making this visual novel in RenPy, you wouldn't have to think about. I don't need to understand anything about draw locations on the screen. I don't need to do anything about the text box. I can't remember if RenPy actually types the text out for you. But you can see how much stuff gets eliminated when you're using a specialist tool rather than trying to do everything from scratch in Godot. You can also imagine how this scales in complexity when you start adding things like, I want to be able to input a dialogue choice. Then we would start thinking about things like, I need to know how to add clickable option boxes. I need to know how to animate option boxes to show they're reacting or responding. I need to know how to record the player's choice so that it matters, right? And then I want to be able to create branching consequences based on player choices. I need to be able to store a player choice and then change which text is being shown based on the most recent choice. And I'm skipping stuff out here. This isn't everything. Even just having a one-way dialogue of a character saying 10 things requires you to get into data management stuff of like building a list of things. And the thing in the first position is the first thing they say, and the thing in the second position is the second thing they say. You know, you then have to know the quirks of your programming language and whether 0 is the first number in the list or 1 is the first number in the list. The point of all of this is to say that programming is really thinking through what you want the computer to do in the way that I just showed you, and then going to the manual and working out how to do each of those things by reading the manual. It's not the fun response anyone ever wants when they ask about this stuff. They want to know a quick way of doing it, and there isn't really a quick way, because learning the language is really a matter of using the language and constantly looking things up. And I think this is going to be shocking to some people, but maybe a relief to others. If you meet someone who's been programming for a long time, they never stop having to look things up, right? It's just they internalize the simple stuff and then they're doing more complicated stuff. So the nature of what they have to look up changes over time. You never really get to a point where you have like the whole of your engine or your language in your head. Research and looking things up is part of the skills of programming. And I think one of the reasons why people get frustrated is they look at how much they have to learn, you know, even in a simple situation like this, they look at how much they have to learn and they get frustrated that other people seem to be able to do this stuff, and they don't realize that if I've already learned to program in one language or in one game engine and I go to another one and I'm trying to do all of this stuff, I'm still going to have to go through the same process I did when I learned a previous language of opening the manual and going through all of these steps and working out how to do each thing. The programming is not complicated. The thing you want the program to do is complicated. And the only way that you will get over your fear of that complexity is to break it down into lots of little things. Now, I want to give you a very silly example, but let's say you go to a country where you don't know the language, right? You go to France and you got your little French phrase book that says how to say some stuff in France. Normally in that situation, you would just use your phrase book to find touristy things. Where's the town hall? Well, où est le Haute de Ville? Or whatever. And that would be appropriate for you because you're a total beginner at French. So you use these starter phrases. But what happens when people first try and program a video game is they don't do that. It's like they've gone to France and then the French that they want to speak, the level they want to speak French at, is like joining a debate society. You know, trying to make really complex arguments or write big expressive poems in that language when they haven't really learnt the basics of où est le Haute de Ville. The problem isn't that French is difficult to learn. The problem is that you don't have a realistic expectation of what a beginner, absolute beginner, should be able to do. And an absolute beginner in a game programming language should be able to just, you know, make a few things move around on the screen. And what we tend to expect to get out of using a game engine is like the illusion of a world, like a character moving around in a world, you know, having physical interactions or having social interactions with characters. And that level of complexity is just not what you should expect to be able to do in the first like month or so of using a game engine. So that will be disheartening for some of you. And if that's the case, I would say just stick to using something easy. Use Ren'Py. Use a visual drag and drop language. There will be people out there who say, no, you should learn things the hard way. No, you should learn things the way that I say you should learn them because that will make you a better programmer. Most of those people are programmers. They are not game designers. And if you do want to learn things the hard way, then please just bear in mind everything I've said in this video. It is a matter of breaking it down into the smallest, absolute smallest things that you need to know and then looking them up and reading the goddamn manual. Because just sitting and going at a bunch of videos passively is not really trying. Whenever people say to me, I've tried to program games, but I couldn't really do it, I always ask them what they mean by try. Because trying for less than a day is not really trying very hard to do something. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'm sure it will bounce off a lot of people because it's not what you want to hear. But if this helps just 1 or 2 people to get started properly with this process, then this video has served its goal.